We are live.
Okay, thank you. Just testing one more time. Everyone can hear me? All right. Well, this is our Finance Committee meeting. That way. Okay, we have multiple items on the agenda today. The first is a discussion regarding the fiscal year 21-22 budget and proposed amendments. I believe we have a presentation from Mr. Francisco.
Yes, Mayor. I am in the process of pulling up my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
This is a memo to council that basically summarizes all of the amendments that we have heard so far to be necessary. Some of them are based on things that we have discovered within our own staff work that need to be corrected. And then some of them we have gotten direction from council, at least to include them as potential amendments to be considered. So the first one is this $100,000 for membership in a neighborhood alliance that was discussed in a study session. The second one is $30,000 for historical markers and or signs that at least one citizen brought forward in one of the public hearings. We got information from the Department of Housing and Urban Development just yesterday or day before that they had made a mistake, and it was a mistake in our favor. So we're getting $13,663 more than what we thought and was going to be included in the budget. So that's just a correction item there. Similarly, in the fire overtime accounts, we double counted some things. So we would just reduce those allocations. It totals up to be $1,061,000 shared between the general fund and the PSST fund. So we'll point out that that $220,000 in the PSST fund, if everything else remains equal, would reduce the subsidy from the general fund to the PSST fund by that amount. Then we have some additional allocations in the risk management fund, basically because of increased workers' compensation costs that we want to try to budget for going into next fiscal year. Number 6 there is street maintenance bond program projects, because the April 6th vote passed. And so we want to get the projects that we think will be at least started during next fiscal year into the capital budget. And then finally, there is $745,000 for the East Alameda Street project that was in fiscal year 23, but we want to advance that project and move it up into fiscal year 22. That's all that we've heard so far. And so at this point, just anything that council wants to add or take away from those amendments, this would be the time. And I see Councilmember Hall's hand.
Yeah, the only thing I don't see that I thought you had made mention of was about the Pollinator Program.
Yeah, the Pollinator Program and this capital campus corner project that were brought up in meetings are fiscal year 21 projects that are going to be financed out of current year allocations. Now, if you wanted to add something in addition in fiscal year 22, then yes, you could have an additional amendment. But our understanding right now is that those projects are going to be taken up this fiscal year 21.
Okay, that perfect. Just so long as we've got that covered. And the campus corner project, I was aware is going to be on, I think, next week. So that's good. Okay, thank you.
Where are we at?
Francisco? Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor.
I was just going to say, where are we at with the sustainability coordinator?
So great conversation with Ms. Gayla Hicks in HR and Mr. Chris Mattingly, our utilities director. We think we've just increased the value of our sustainability coordinator position. We flew it. We had 6 applicants, which was not kind of the response we thought. but Mr. Mattingly had an environmental services manager who is retiring, and that position is actually more highly compensated. So we've actually combined the job descriptions for our new sustainability coordinator. And we look at the projects we've been working on recently on the water side, on the solid waste side, and on the energy side. They are enterprise fund heavy right now, sewer and water and solid waste. So we're going to refly the position at a higher salary, and we think we will expand our applicant pool. Hope to have applications in before the beginning of the fiscal year, and we will move swiftly. We now even have office space to house this individual.
And so what will the title be, since it's a combination?
Now I'm trying to remember the title, but sustainability coordinator is in that. It may say sustainability and environmental services coordinator.
Right.
Oh, there's Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Now I have had, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask Anthony, in the current list that Anthony has up on the screen before us, that in this rare situation leading into a new fiscal year with the ARPA dollars and council's ability to gather in retreat setting and come up with that strategy, we can put the appropriation in the budget for those dollars, because now the quantity, the dollar amount is known. It'll be in it, and then council can just program it. So Anthony, I think that was our plan. We discussed making sure the appropriation existed for ARPA, and then council will just direct us how they want that money programmed.
Yes, sir, that's correct now. And that's an additional agenda item for later in this meeting. But if council were to appropriate those funds in this fiscal year, or at least some of them, then that would show up in fiscal year 21. But again, we're awaiting further direction from council on how they want to proceed on that. And yes, if we need to prepare a budget amendment related to that direction, then we will.
So I'm going to bring up some of the feedback that we got from residents at our first budget hearing, that, you know, we reallocated a chunk of money, over $800,000 from the proposed police budget to address several community issues. One of them, I think you could say, our neighborhood alliance, that's 100,000. The auditor is kind of up in the air. So we have not budgeted for that. And that was what, over 200, I believe.
Yes, ma'am, and we have budgeted for that. That's actually
okay. So that's all. Yeah, that's already in there then. So what else can we be doing to address some of the issues I think we were trying to address last June? And what does that look like? I know that we have a team of staff working with the Bloomberg Harvard Innovation Track to come up with programming that will help, support residents of some age. I'm not sure. I had mentioned programs like the PAL camp being fully funded. I just want to make sure that we're not going to end up in a similar situation because we were not as thoughtful in the planning and addressing the goals that we were trying to achieve then.
So those are elements we absolutely can plug in. You just need to have that conversation in a public environment like we are right now. Other pieces that we believe fit wonderfully with potentially some new federal dollars include an investment in the remodel of 718 North Porter to really make that facility what we envision it can be. Right now, the building is sound. We may need to expand some restrooms and then change the configuration on the bottom floor. We are prepared now to advance a conversation. I have had one conversation with our new sheriff regarding the sobering center that was discussed in years past. We think their participation in such a development provides a good level of security for employees working in the facility. So it could be a really great partnership, but definitely will require a little bit of a reconfiguration. So we will be bringing you a request for that conversation out of those new federal dollars for a one-time expense. We are also talking about programming our behavioral health response with a concept that the first responders in calls where our dispatch is able to triage and identify a behavioral health crisis. Those first responders could be a group of our medical aid from the fire department, CIT trained. We've got a great crew of paramedic and advanced life safety certified firefighters who do address these issues. Usually it's after the fact, and we have an opportunity through a couple of new funding sources that the federal government will be sending to Oklahoma for specifically this type of training. Since our police department is very well trained in those areas, we will be advancing a concept to train fire personnel in that exact same skill set to be the first responder in those behavioral health crises. So really excited about what that program is going to look like. We'll be bringing that to you in recommendations. It solves the problem we've been battling with, and that is who would dispatch be able to contact, not necessarily Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but after hours on the weekends when a lot of our nonprofit service providers are just not available or could not respond in nearly as quick a fashion as our fire personnel could. So we think we have an opportunity to do something fantastic that we think the rest of the country may follow our lead in that respect.
Okay. Is it possible by any chance to budget for a second phone number? I was on a call with Reimagining Public Safety today, and they have a separate behavioral health team. Looks a little bit different than what you're describing, but it's a whole different phone number. So they don't have to worry about dispatch sending it the wrong way. So maybe it could still be dispatch who takes it, but it comes under 711 or something like that.
I think that is just, I mean, it's so strange that you think, well, that seems so simple. How come we didn't think of that before? I think that's a great conversation. We can have our group of folks that work in communications do that inquiry and figure out what number might be available to us to have locally. If that helps the triage from family members who know a family member is dealing with a behavioral health issue, to call this number instead of 911, and you will get a whole different level of service. Some of our dispatchers are trained in CIT. I can't verify all of them are, but we would also love to expand that type of training for dispatchers, whether it's CIT or its equivalent, but there is training like that for dispatch to help them triage. And I think our ability to be able to expand dispatch and have more staff on hand in that new EOC really makes that a viable solution.
I would appreciate looking into that. And because I know we have these, ARP funds hanging over our head, but they're one-time funds. And so if it's a program we would like to see continue past the, distribution of these funds, then I think we need to reflect it in our budget. And as we've all said a million times, your budget reflects your values as a community. So I think that would help address any initial confusion on what kind of services our residents are asking for in their emergency. So I'd definitely like to see more of that. And then Daryl, you and I had spoken about, and I think I've discussed it with a few of our council members, but haven't had the opportunity to discuss with everyone yet, a program called Norman CEO, Norman's Children's Educational Opportunities. I'm hoping that ARP funds can get it started this year. So I don't know if we need to budget for it in this fiscal year 22 budget, but I want that on the radar, that I do want that to be something that our community invests in to help break the cycle of poverty in our children going forward.
And with those dollars, Mr. Francisco received our first allocation. It was 11,122,000. We believe that program fits in terms of guidance for supporting families and children coming out of a COVID environment. So we can prepare that as part of an appropriation adjustment to the current fiscal year based on the $11 million recently received.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Holman.
I just had kind of similar questions for clarification based on the amendments that we approved last year and then reaffirmed, I guess. Making sure folks, this year amendments for those things may not be necessary because we've already budgeted to address those types of things. And I kind of just wanted to get clarification on that as well. So mine was kind of similar to Mayor Clark on that one. Just
I
making sure
would
that we
point
are.
out, council member, that the auditor is the only thing that you actually
Right.
budgeted for. Other than that, you had a reserve of fund balance that you could appropriate, but it's not budgeted.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that for those watching, that really we only had to do amendments last year because we hadn't really prepared for it beforehand. And so I definitely like the idea that was just mentioned about the 711 and, really sticking with the fact that the feedback that I heard a lot was that we didn't want the police department to be the one responding, that we didn't want it to be a subdivision of the police department, that people wanted a separate entity that could respond, at least initially, depending on what the call may be, and that, the police can be there if they're needed. And so I definitely like that idea for sure. And so that was the only real thing I had on this one. The amendments listed seem to reflect what I've heard as well. And so that's all I have at the moment. Thanks.
Okay. Oh. Sorry, habit to unmute that, even though this is weird. Okay, so any other questions or comments regarding item 1, which are amendments to the proposed fiscal year 21-22 budget? I think Councilmember Holman just spoke. On to item 2, discussion of possible options to fully fund our public safety sales tax to PSS2 and what that will look like. I'm not sure who's presenting on that one.
Ms. Walker.
Nope.
Yes, let me share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, as you all know, the last several years, we have made amendments to our budget to ensure that the public safety sales tax fund is funded enough to cover its expenses. As revenues have been more volatile the last few years, and we've certainly seen this in the general fund, it follows over to the public safety sales tax fund as well. And so when you're hiring personnel, of course, those aren't one-time expenses. They occur every year and they're an increased cost with that. And so the revenues have just not kept up with those increasing expenses. And so the council has made the decision each year to supplement that fund with general fund dollars.
So I want to clarify that. We've never taken money away from PSST. We've actually supplemented it every single year.
That's correct. You wouldn't be allowed to take money away from PSST because it was collected for a specific purpose. We have supplemented it for the last several years to make sure that all of those additions could be maintained.
Thank you.
So PSST 1 is really where this started. It was adopted in 2008 by the voters. It was a 0.5% temporary sales tax, which was slated to expire in 2015, but it provided 41 additional police personnel, 30 additional fire personnel, the vehicles and equipment that go along with that, as well as 2 new fire stations 8 and 9. That expired in 2015, and council, prior to its expiration, took forward an extension of that tax, essentially making it permanent in 2014. And so that replaced PSST 1 when it expired. The goal of PSST 2, as it was presented to the voters, was to retain those 71 personnel that were hired under PSST 1, add 13 school resource officers jointly funded with participating public school systems in Norman. It wasn't restricted to just Norman Public Schools, although that's where we have them now. Addition of 4 emergency communication officers, 2 emergency vehicle mechanics, replacement of the city's emergency communication system, construction of the EOC, replacement of fire trucks and apparatus, and then relocation and reconstruction of fire station number 5. Now, what the ordinance said was that once you do all of those things, then PSST revenues will no longer be held in a separate fund. They were going to be absorbed along with the expenses into the general fund, into the capital fund, as you see set forth on the slide there. Assuming we had extra money, there were other projects we could spend it on in furtherance of the ordinance and of public safety. So hopefully you can see this. It's a little easier to see probably in a Zoom environment than it would be in person, but this is the budget sheet for the FYE 2022 budget that we're considering in June. And I've highlighted the 2 interfund transfers that have been necessary to keep that fund healthy and able to cover its expenses. To date, with those funds, we have hired those 71 PSST1 police and fire personnel and retained those positions. We've hired 9 of 13 SROs. We've hired 2 of the 4 emergency communication officer positions, or budgeted for them. They may have open positions still. 2 of 2 emergency vehicle mechanics, and then bond proceeds funded replacement of the emergency communication system, a platform fire truck, and a portion of the EOC construction costs. And as you all know, that project is underfunded. So like I said earlier, revenue in the general fund and in the PSST fund are based on the same growth assumptions. And so as we have seen our general fund struggle to meet those growth assumptions, the PSST fund has struggled as well. And so that's really what's led to this issue. You can see, I have to get a portion of the Zoom out of my way. You can see the dollar amount anticipated to make this fund whole does not go down over the years. It goes up as those personnel costs and things will increase as well. So council has talked several times over the last few months about what can we do to address this. It's hard for the general fund to cover that when the general fund is also not meeting projections. But what is the best way to address that? And so we've talked through these things. These aren't new ideas. Don't hire any more of the personnel until the revenues are sufficient. Delay the capital projects that are needed until the revenues are sufficient to cover those expenses. But this last bullet is what's come up recently, and that's to ask the voters for an increase in the sales tax. So I got with Anthony because I don't do math, and he's telling me an additional 1/8%. So that would bring the sales tax up from 1/2% to 5/8%. Would cover expenses for a few years. That gives us an additional $2.5 million annually, but at some point down the road, we would be in this position again. An additional 1/4%, which would make it 3/4% total, would eliminate the need for the subsidy. So we're anticipating that would be $5 million additional revenue annually. The important thing when drafting this is we have 81 personnel. We have 2 fire stations that are staffed with PSST personnel. We have bond expenses, we have to worry about. So we have to be able to preserve that existing sales tax to avoid creating issues with all of those things, including laying off a large number of staff. So that's really what we wanted to talk to you about today is what, if that's the direction you want to go forward with, what kind of increase are you comfortable with? When do you want to put that before the voters? And then we'll prepare the draft language and bring an ordinance forward calling the election in accordance with the state election board timeline.
Is it possible to do some of the projects, which I guess the main project would be Station 5, to relieve it enough that it then takes care of itself?
I don't think that that's enough of a relief, but I will look to Anthony for that.
Yeah, and the Station 5 is budgeted for about $3.5 million. If you assume that we will continue to subsidize the public safety sales tax fund for about $2 million a year, that could buy you a couple more years, but it would not make a permanent solution.
So what I'm hearing is even if we used ARP funds, which was a thought I had, given it does deal with emergency response in an area that's underserved in East Norman, so should easily qualify, that's not going to fix this. And it will eventually go under again. And we will continue to have to supplement it because we chose to fund this with sales tax. And we're the only state in the nation that ties our general funds to sales tax the way that we do. So the only answer is to increase the allocation or it will continue to bring us down. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, you summarized that correctly. Now, I would remind council that when public safety sales tax 2 was envisioned, we knew this would happen. We knew that the revenue line would cross with the expenditure line. We knew that expenditures would grow faster than revenues. It's just that it has been worse than we thought, and the lines crossed earlier than we thought they would. We
And so go
also
ahead.
thought we'd be in a better position in the general fund to absorb those additional costs. So again, we thought back in 2014, 2015, that once the critical capital needs were done, we would put the public safety sales tax additional expenses into the general fund, with 3/8% of that sales tax becoming a general fund revenue source. And again, that would just be an additional cost to the general fund. That was always envisioned. It's just that we thought the general fund would be in a better position to absorb those costs, because we thought we would have a stormwater utility to offload those $3 million or so of general fund costs that we're burdened with now.
So basically, our police department and fire department have a budget. And then we also need to, when we're talking about the full picture of what we invest in public safety in Norman, Oklahoma, add what goes towards supplementing the PSST to keep it above water.
That's one way of looking at it.
Okay. Thanks. That's it for my question right now. Councilmember Holman?
Thank you. Do I recall recently we talked about the amount of the subsidy was about equal to the debt service on capital projects in the PSST? Did I hear that right? That if we paid off the debt, we would have less of a subsidy right now?
That would buy you several years, yes.
Yeah, that's kind of the option I would prefer that we really look at.
But you would need a source to pay off the debt.
What is that number?
It's about $2 million a year.
And what's the total debt?
Yeah.
We have about $13 million of remaining debt.
Well, that is something we really need to consider, because I am extremely hesitant to raise sales tax further for this when it already has a 0.5%. And we have public transit issues on the horizon that are a matter of our whole community and region as well. So, and state law restricts that specifically to sales tax, the transit funding. So as it stands, that's where we're at with that. I know there's been discussion. I don't know the current status of the potential change in law that would allow property tax to be used for fire service. I know it's primarily about rural settings, I think, but we have one fire station that is definitely rural, and our next two are going to be on the edge of urban rural Norman. And I mean, Fire Station 9 is on the edge of the urban rural Norman as well. So that could be another potential option we look at when it comes to fire service. I mean, it'd be nice if that could also apply to police protection as well, I think. But looking at that, whatever the status may be legally on that type of funding source for fire protection, and then looking at some debt. Maybe we can't pay it all off, but maybe we use some of the money we're getting from the federal government to pay off debt, which I think could save us some money. It's never fun to pay off debt when you get a big check. You don't want to pay off your debt. You want to go out and buy something nice and new, but that could save us some money and some time. Maybe the general fund will be in better shape in a few more years, perhaps.
At least as it relates to the ARPA funds, paying off debt is specifically mentioned as an ineligible expense.
Yeah.
Ineligible? Okay.
Yes. Councilmember, one of the things that we'll be looking at closely when they're talking about infrastructure dollars still being negotiated in DC in that next round of funding, we will be looking for that specific opportunity. And it just occurred to me, Mr. Francisco, based on Councilmember Holman's statements, can we contact bond counsel and ask them what the likelihood of an advanced refunding of the current debt, a refinancing of it? We know we are at crazy historic lows on our interest rates. If there's a way we can save $1 million on that debt service and stretch it out a little longer.
Theoretically, yes, you could. It would not be that much of a savings, though. I thought what Councilmember Holman was proposing was a new bond issue to buy the critical capital needs, both that exist and that would be envisioned in the future. And that would be an interesting proposal. It would have to be voted on,
Right.
but it would be
I wasn't necessarily thinking about a new bond, more just if we were getting an influx of funds from the federal government, we could look at maybe paying off some debt with it. But if you're saying we can't, then I guess that's not an option. But really, I'm just interested in exploring every possible way, except for asking voters to approve an increase. I mean, if that's what it comes down to, I don't want to go into layoffs of existing PSST positions that voters have approved. But increasing the sales tax rate for PSST is kind of the last resort, and for me anyway. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one.
And that's an excellent point about the RTA, because that one is by law only sales tax. But with the public safety districts that we got across the finish line that OML's been working on for years, I believe we could have an election and make that one property tax. Is that, I mean, Catherine, would you please comment on that?
And I don't have that bill in front of me. I did read it early in the session, and so I haven't seen what, if any, changes were made when it was adopted, but it has been adopted. I believe it is fire protection only. Councilmember Holman, I think you're correct. It's aimed at rural areas, but I don't think that when I read it the first time, I don't remember thinking it wasn't available to us. Because you're right, we do have rural areas in Norman. So I'm happy to look at that again and get some information to you all about that.
Well, if it worked out and that could pay for the operation of fire station number 5, that would, I would assume, help the general fund a little bit if there was another revenue source that could help pay for at least one of our fire stations, the operations of it, and maybe the reconstruction of it too. So, okay, that's all I have at the moment. Thanks.
Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, so I've just got a couple of questions too, and a lot of it does tie back to, what the guidance is on the American Rescue Plan funds and what we can and can't use it for. And I had noticed in looking that over again today that debt service was specifically prohibited from being used with these funds, as Mr. Francisco just stated. So kind of going on top of what you were saying too, Mayor Clark, I was wondering if with the guidance that we received, if the EOC, making up that shortfall for the EOC capital project, if that's also something that could be relieved from the PSST portion of that. And also, I think when the PSST passed, as you've said so many times, it was based on several assumptions, one of which was that we would have a stormwater utility in place by now too. And it does look like we have the opportunity with the ARP funds to address some stormwater capital projects that might also, alleviate some of that pressure on the general fund. So I'm just trying to figure out if there's any way we can parlay the dollars that we do have available to us in different categories that may have some impact on what the shortfall is with the PSST and what we're providing from the general fund. And I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And we've looked at the EOC piece of that. Of course, we've already issued debt for some of that, and we can't repay the debt with these funds. But to the extent that there's an overage, that's a possibility for that, we believe. The rule that we have right now is an interim final rule, which is interim and final is kind of an oxymoron. You can't be both. So we do anticipate more guidance coming out. I've got someone in our office who's working on this and actually is in a National League of Cities conference right now about it. So we're staying on top of that. And we'll let you know as we find out more information. But we do believe the EOC overage certainly could qualify as a public safety expenditure.
So Councilmember Hall, if you keep thinking like that, Anthony Francisco is going to turn you into a finance director yet.
I don't think he
A
needs
lot
to
of the
worry about,
qualifications.
I don't think he needs to worry about his job security one single bit.
Well, before we move on to Councilmember Nash, I will share that I fully support using our ARP funds to make sure we build an EOC that we can be proud of, that actually meets the long-term needs of our community and not shortchanging emergency. Anything with the word emergency in it should not be shortchanged. So I fully support moving that forward now. I know that we are hoping to have a conversation and planning on having a conversation at our council retreat in July. But this one, I think we can take care of sooner than later. So I want to publicly share that with my colleagues and hope to get some feedback from them as well. Councilmember Nash.
Yes, the option to put it up for a vote for the increase, is that temporary or permanent? Because it seems like it makes sense to put it up for a vote for a temporary increase for, say, a couple of years or however many years until we can we think that it'll take to get back on track. But I don't like the idea of a tax increase either. But yeah, this part of the budget is kind of in trouble, and it seems like we ought to give the voters a chance to choose, even if they might want to choose the option that I don't like of increasing sales tax. Yeah, there might be enough out there that think that that's an appropriate course of action. And then once they've chosen and we can predict that they'll shoot it down, then we can go into contingencies if it doesn't pass. But maybe a temporary increase would be a better route to propose if we do go to the propose for a voting option rather than a permanent increase onto the.
Now,
Yes,
now
it's
I would point out that was kind of the difference between public safety sales tax 1 and public safety sales
Right.
tax 2, because these personnel expenditures are permanent expenditures. So it's not wise to pay for permanent expenditures with a temporary revenue.
That's my understanding, that the shortfalls from the capital projects and larger projects in it that are not
No,
permanent.
sir, that's not correct.
Okay.
The shortfall is because the revenues aren't growing as fast as the ongoing expenditures. That has
Gotcha.
always been the problem.
All right. Well, that makes a little bit more sense then. Thank you.
I think you might be calling on me, Mayor Clark, but I can't hear you. So, is that right?
Seriously, you can't hear me?
No, I can now. I can now.
Okay, I was like, no, I guess Councilmember Hall.
Okay. I also wanted to just follow up on the slide that Ms. Walker presented about, I think it revolves around the concern of if we do take it to the voters, how could we, I want to make sure I understand how it could be worded so that, we're not repealing the whole thing, because that sounds dire from the way you presented that could be a potential outcome. Is there a way to, write the language, ballot language, to preserve what we already have in place if the voters would decide not to increase it?
Yes, we would just limit the question before the voters to an increase or an additional sales tax rate increase, essentially. So I don't know if it'd be PSST 2A, 2B, but there's a way to do it where you're just putting that one increase in front of the voters and preserving what they've already approved.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly, because I think I'm, on board with my colleagues in the sense that it's not my first choice to take a sales tax increase to the voters, but on the other hand, I also am not comfortable with continuing the status quo of how we're choosing to continue to address the shortfall. And we have a, projected shortfall for the short term at the very least. So I would just want to make sure that if we do that, that we're not going to be, creating even more damage in the process. And then the other part of that is my other concern that I've had all along is the number of very important initiatives that we do need to take to the voters. And the whole idea of voter fatigue and, which one comes first. We need a water rate increase. We know we're going to have a public safety, a public transit vote soon. So we have some really important issues that are going to be taken to the voters. So I think the timing, if we go this route, is going to be really important too.
Speaking of that, I think it's because of redistricting. We did get a notice that we cannot have elections, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Walker, December, January, or March. Our February election still stands, but we're already losing options, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's just a one-time thing, luckily. But yeah, in the next several months, we are going to start being short on dates as we move forward through 2021.
So that's the end of 21 and into 22.
December
Yes.
21 and then January and March 22.
Well, okay, let's just complicate that picture even more.
And can we have elections later this year if we wanted to? I can't recall because it's an off year and I know they limit us.
Yeah, if Brenda's still on, she may be able to answer this. I didn't bring the sheet with me, but there are some dates in the fall. September is an option. I think is December an option? She's looking, I can see. So there are dates coming up in the fall that are available. And then of course, February, April, and in 2022, I think we'll have quite a few dates.
Yeah.
After the redistricting.
And we just need to,
Yeah,
we got to give them several months lead time though, correct?
Yeah, you have to give 60 days notice.
And we're also talking about a potential November election for the water rate increase, right? And that, I know we're going to get to this later, but, we can use ARP funding for water projects of all sorts. So that may be another thing we can play around with.
It's true.
Have an election and basically your choices now would be August, September, October, and November. And the August one is coming up for a deadline to the election board of June the 10th. So
I think we can write that one off.
Yeah, you'd have to move like tomorrow. And then a September election would be July the 15th notice, which means
is,
you have to have it on second reading by July 13th.
would that be before our retreat? So we're down to, I think, logically October and November. Okay, well, now we know. It's what we got. We'll work around it. Councilmember Holman.
I was just going to say, I think the restrictions on election dates is about municipal officer elections specifically.
There, yeah.
Candidate.
So there's other more options for things that don't involve electing us or people. I would feel some hesitancy to put that on the ballot before we do the water rate. I feel like water is more important. I feel like water is the most important thing. That is the most important resource. It's the most important service that we have to provide to the people. Because without water resources, we don't need a police or fire department or anything else, in my opinion. So I would really like to get that taken care of and maybe look at a PSST if that's the way we got to do it. If that's our last resort option is to propose a increase to voters. I think I would maybe prefer we look at that in the spring, but after we do water. I just would be hesitant to put PSST before water. People say no to it, and then 2 months later, we're asking them for another increase. They're gonna, I could see a lot of people saying, well, we just said no to increasing taxes. We don't want a water rate increase either. So I don't know. That's just kind of my initial thoughts about that. But if we had it done, if we did an election for PSST in next spring, that could have, it ready for the next budget, the 2023 FYE budget. So
that's all excellent points. I'm curious to see if we use ARP funds to fully fund the EOC, will that help a little bit? And then I want to know more about the public safety tax districts and see. So yeah, I don't want to rush this because I know the public safety districts are new, and that might buy us some time as well.
Well, the ARP stuff, what Lee mentioned about being able to use those funds for water projects too, I'd definitely be interested in that. And if that turns out to be a significant option, maybe we don't need to go to a water rate increase as soon as we thought. I don't know. Chris might have some other thoughts about that, but.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm wondering is if we are able to use ARP funding for some really important capital projects, water related, if that water rate increase might look a little different.
Okay. Councilmember Foreman, I saw your hand up at one point.
In the car, so it's a little hard. I was just gonna say, I know that PSST is a very dicey, topic, but I think it's something that's really important and something that's been heavy on the table, and I would not want to put that off. I would want to put that before we do anything else. I think we just need to get past that one. I'm trying to think of how to say it nicely. Just see what happens, because we will start in the spring. We're already going to be starting into looking at the budget going forward. And I don't want to keep subsidizing it from the general fund. So I think we need to put that before the voters as soon as we can, because if we can't keep up with what we're doing, I talked to Daryl at one point, and I think that's like 14 positions that we would have to have hard conversations about. So that would just be my two thoughts.
Okay. Well, staff, I think we've gave you more work to help us solve this problem, but that means there's options, and I'm grateful for that. So I appreciate everyone's concerns about sales tax, about getting issues over, being mindful of other elections. This is certainly not an easy issue to solve, but we are clearly actively working on it. So I appreciate all of you, council members and staff, as we continue to tackle one that will have a long-term impact on the economic stability of our community. So, and thank you, Anthony, for continuing to dive into that. Any other comments or questions regarding item number 2? Seeing none. Item 3, discussion regarding American Recovery Plan Fund status.
We've kind of had quite a bit of discussion about this topic already. And we've gotten some good direction, but I did want to bring to your attention, if you hadn't seen in your packet, this recommendation that came from your Public Safety Sales Tax Oversight Committee. And it is just basically urging council to use ARP funds for the completion of the Emergency Operations Center. So that's all this is talking about.
I have a procedural question with the ARP fund. So I know we got 11-ish this, like now, we have it, but then we get the rest later. So would we pay for things and then pay ourselves back when we get the second round?
Well, to the extent that you have identified projects that you know are going to be eligible, yes, that is something that you could do.
Okay.
But just know that, where you're talking about $11 million or $22 million, that's a lot to upfront. Even if you know that you're going to be getting the money back in a year, that's a lot to upfront. So I would suggest to council that you consider these 2 tranches separately, or at least from a timing standpoint, where you've talked about, perhaps doing this EOC project now and then talking about what you're going to do with remaining 13 million or whatever it may be at your retreat in July. That would be a good strategy. Or where we've heard some projects tonight that you might want to do early on, like the 718 Porter building, or which I'm almost certain that would be an eligible expense because it's in a census tract that is a targeted census tract. So I'm almost certain that would be eligible. But again, whatever council wants to do, we'll make it work because again, we do have $11 million in the bank right now. We're just bringing to your attention that the Public Safety Sales Tax Oversight Committee says, so let's go. You know, we've been putting off this EOC project, waiting on funds to do it right, if you will, to close the gap in funding. And they at least are saying, here's our answer.
So let's say all of council does want to move forward on that. What does that process look like?
That process would look like the council would pass a resolution that basically appropriates $9.5 million of the $11 million that we have already on hand toward that project. And then Brent Barber and Chief Foster and the project managers would move forward with hiring a contractor, finishing up the design, and moving forward with the construction of the facility this year. And so, again, the project has been finally designed pretty much already. So it's really close to being shovel ready. We have a site and we move forward pretty quickly if that's what council wants to do.
Mrs. Walker, would you feel comfortable with me asking if there is consensus among the council members in the committee meeting to bring them that item on the next agenda?
That's fine. Just understand it's not a vote.
It's just consensus. If this group on the Zoom
feedback.
says, bring us that agenda item, we'll have that agendized for you at the next council meeting.
Before we ask consensus, Councilmember Hall, comments?
Yeah, I wanted to just ask, the date of that letter was May 14th, and the number we're talking about is 9.5 million.
That's based on the latest engineer's
Much discussion.
estimate.
Okay. So does that include the dramatic increases that we're seeing in construction costs? Because just in the last week or so, I know that the advisory committees for the multi-sport center and the senior center have had to address and deal with shortfalls in their projects. So I just want to make sure I understand what that is. That 9.5 million, the dollar amount under the current supply chain issues that we're having with construction materials.
I'm almost certain that it does, just from the standpoint that, it was 8.5 million a week or two ago. And and it has gone up,
Okay. Well, yeah, I just wanted to understand that because that obviously is posing a challenge for us across the board on some projects that we're considering. And I mean, I've been on record as saying months ago that I felt like this particular project, it's really hard to make shortcuts, and we would be shortchanging our community from the get-go before we even put a shovel in the ground. So I am definitely in support of completing that project. The function of it affects every single person who lives in Norman. And with the kind of weather events that we've seen this year and the continuing extreme weather events that we're probably going to continue to see, not to mention just the normal crazy weather in Oklahoma, plus dealing with the pandemic and who else knows what's right around the corner. It seems like that's a project that we need to complete at the level of expectation of what our community is wanting to see.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman.
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Hall. I think DOC, that it is a voter approved project. It actually has 2 voter approved components to it due to the Traffic Control Management Center being a separate voter approved initiative that would be housed in that in the, so it's kind of like a double mandate built. And so I do support moving forward with whatever we need to do to get this project underway.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Nash. Thoughts?
So the construction materials made the cost go up by about 12%. Is that, am I understanding that correctly, Anthony, with the 8.5 million up to 9.5 million?
The math is correct. And I don't want to say that I can't say for sure that that's why the cost inflated or by that much. But I do know that the cost inflated over the last week or two.
There was a recost. They redid their costing and it came out to 9.5. But I do not think that included the impact of what this may have. The hope is that those would go down before we actually got to construction. We'd have to bid it out and everything. It'd take still a few months to get to construction. And they did build in some cushion for inflation. I just don't know that they built in enough to account for the hit we took because of this most recent storm.
Would it be safe to assume that delaying this project by a year would have costs in the background at least $1 million or more? So there would be expenses incurred if we delay this project.
Yes, I'm assuming it would. Yes, I think there would be expenses increase and things over that year.
So waiting out this increase in the materials probably isn't a viable option. So that now does the new center have an office space built in for the mental health crisis team?
I think, I don't know if we were talking about a team or utilizing fire personnel. So I don't know if they would need an office.
Oh, well,
There's
maybe they'd
offices
like an
built in
office.
for offices built in for emergency operations, but nothing specific for anything like a team. It'd be emergency operations, communications, and traffic management center.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's all the thoughts that I've got on them. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Foreman.
Same. It's just it stinks that we couldn't have done this before. The cost of materials, I think, are just going to keep astronomically increasing. So the sooner we can get to going on this, I think the better.
Well, we certainly tried back in August. So
We did.
just want to point that one out. Councilmember Hall.
Just the one other thought that I had, I understand that 9.5 million is an estimate. And I think I did just hear that there is kind of a cushion built in. So I guess I would say that I would be the most comfortable if we capped it at 9.5 million. So we knew what we were doing.
Fair point. All right, City Manager Pyle, it sounds like there is consensus for moving this forward for a full council discussion.
Direction is clear. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding the ARP fund status? Mine were mostly procedural about, do we spend it all now or wait patiently? So thank you for your guidance on that, Mr. Francisco. Okay, seeing no other questions, on to item 4, the submission of the revenue. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Hall.
Sorry. I guess I just am interested in, I just want to understand process-wise, if we move ahead on this, and the assumption being that the council just hypothetically may approve moving forward, so then that reduces our first tranche by we'll be down to 2 million approximately
Yes.
and that would be this fiscal year?
Yes, if we were to agendize it this month or next month, it would be in fiscal year 21, yes.
Okay, or we could just be talking about the EOC piece in this fiscal year.
Yes.
And then go ahead and have that fuller discussion at the retreat in July. Okay, because I am really interested in understanding and seeing the ARP funding in relationship to stormwater, wastewater, all the water related capital projects that we might be able to address. I'm very interested in seeing what that might look like, but I think that's for a later conversation. So, okay.
All right. Now, I think we're ready for item 4, which is the revenue and expenditure reports.
The revenue and expenditure reports were included in your packet. I really don't have much to add to what's on paper, except to say the May sales tax report, which is not included in the April figures that you saw. But the May sales tax was the highest sales tax return that we have ever seen. And I will tell you that we get our wire transfer information from the State Tax Commission around the 10th of every month. And when this one came in, and our Treasury folks brought it down to me, and I saw a 7 in the millions place, and I had never seen a 7 in the millions place with our monthly sales tax remittances. So I immediately trotted back down the hall and, double checked everything, made sure this was right. But then you were hearing in Oklahoma City was also up by like 30%. So what I think we're seeing going on, remember our May sales tax is expenditures during March. And March is when the stimulus checks were being spent down. And I think that had a huge impact on our local economy and our state economy, and I guess on our national economy. But again, because we are so dependent on sales tax, it's a good thing. And I hope it's not an anomaly. I certainly don't expect to be up by 30% again in June, but I hope to be up again in June, which is reflective of our sales during April. Cautioning you again that comparing this year to last year, you're comparing coming out of COVID period to COVID period. So what we have tried to do is compare fiscal year 21 in addition to fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 19. But at least in this most recent sales tax return, we were up 20% even compared to 2019. So again, this is flat, was really good, and we hope it will continue.
And so say that again, this was the highest sales tax revenue you've ever seen or increase you've ever seen?
The highest dollar amount that we have ever seen, and that includes the February tax returns that reflect Christmas holiday sales. This was the most we've ever gotten in that check. That's what I'm telling you. I had never seen a 7 in the millions place before. And I'm a weird enough guy that was something's got to be wrong here. This is too good. So it was just we'll see if it continues, but it was a really good one-time return.
Well, I'll take a moment just to state publicly, imagine if all student loan debt was forgiven and the kind of stimulus that would also provide to our economy and working families. So if anyone's watching that, has some pull on that one, there you go. Councilor Holman, your hand went up real quick. Anything else?
Oh, I just, Anthony went over it there, but yeah, just comparing it year to year and looking back at like 17, 18 was like our worst year ever, or one of the worst year since I've been on council, when it was like 9 out of 12 months were negative, were red bars. And so it does make it hard to, is this a real increase if you're looking at the percent over really low lows from the previous years, last year specifically? But Anthony, telling us that it's the highest number amount that he's ever seen, that is pretty encouraging though. And I kind of hoped that all along that once we got a handle on COVID and things could start returning back to, at least economically, or people being able to move about freely and gather and do things, that there would be hopefully like an opening of the floodgates type of situation where everybody's been all pent up. Now I'm going to go out, I'm going to go eat at the restaurants, I'm going to go to the venues and the bars and the shops and all that stuff. So hopefully that one was just the beginning of many months of positive green bars. Thanks.
I second that optimistic comment. I urge everyone watching to continue to eat local, shop local, drink local, do all the things local. It makes a difference. And I do believe our best days are ahead. I firmly believe that. I hope it's the roaring 20s that we're about to see, that by God, we've all earned. So we shall see. Any other comments on the revenue and expenditure reports? Okay, seeing none. Item 5, submission of the report on open positions.
All righty. Does anybody have any questions? This report that you got is dated May 11th. So of course, many things have changed since then. So the sustainability coordinator and the environmental services manager are separate on this, but they will be combined in the future. Other than that, we can't find a registered vet tech. So if anybody knows one, send them our way. We've had it open for a couple months and haven't received any applications. So
Really?
yeah. Yeah. So put the word.
I hate to, I hate to say this, but are we promoting it through the recent graduates at Oklahoma State and Stillwater, since they've got the veterinary school and we don't? I mean, I don't mind stealing some educated people here for Norman.
Advertising in that area. Of course, we're on Indeed, and that's where we get 90% of our applicants from, are looking there. So
really, that is a fun fact there,
Oh, yeah.
Gayla.
yeah, it's really used. Yep.
Okay.
We don't.
All
do
right.
So that's what we do.
Any other questions or comments regarding the report on open positions? All right. Seeing none, our final item, miscellaneous comments. I think we've had some rather robust discussion about some very important topics, so I have nothing to add. If no one else does, this meeting is adjourned.